And he is going to read for us, and he's going to speak to us and share some things that he's been reflecting on for a few months now. So, Chris. Can I pray?
Yes, please.
As we start. Father, we thank you for Chris, and we pray now that you will anoint him, and the things that have been on his heart and on his mind will be shared with us in a way that helps us to cope with life and faith and witness. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. A difficult subject, but as Rod said, one that's been on my heart for some time because of personal circumstances and things I've seen happening with other people. And what I want to do is to start with a reading. We're not going to see it on the screen simply because it's quite a long passage, so I'm going to basically cut it down to an extent. And it's 1 Samuel 30. And it's a very significant story about David, a time in David's life when he went through probably the worst day in his life. And just to set the scene, as we know, David had success in his life. He had defeated Goliath. He had been anointed as the future king of Israel. But the current king wasn't too happy about that. So King Saul was after him, was trying to kill him. So what David had done with a small band of followers was to set up in a town called Ziklag in the south part of the country. And so he lived there awaiting the fulfillment of the prophecy that he would become king. And he was away from Ziklag for a few days. And so we approach the passage where David is actually returning to Ziklag. He's approaching Ziklag. And this is where we find out what awaits him. David and his men reached Ziklag on the third day. Now the Amalekites had attacked Ziklag and burned it down, and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both young and old. They killed none of them, but carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men came to Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David became greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. And David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" "Pursue them," the Lord answered. "You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." David and the 600 men with him came to the Esau ravine, where some stayed behind, for 200 men were too exhausted to cross the ravine. So David and 400 men continued the pursuit. They found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David. David asked him, "To whom do you belong? Where do you come from?" He said, "I'm an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me when I became ill 3 days ago." David asked him, "Can you lead me down to this raiding party?" And he led David down. There they were, scattered over the countryside, eating, drinking, and reveling because of the great amount of plunder they'd taken from the land of the Philistines and Judah. And David fought them from dusk until the evening of the next day, and none of them got away. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken. Nothing was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plunder or anything else they'd taken. He brought everything back. And David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him, who were left behind. All the evil men, troublemakers among David's followers, said, "Because they didn't go out with us, we will not share with them the plunder we recovered." And David replied, "No, my brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us. He has protected us and handed us over to the forces that came against us. The share of the man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as that of him who went down to the battle. All shall share alike." If we can have the first slide, Richard, please. The bottom line, people, is that we know that bad stuff happens in our lives. And the older we get, the more we understand and appreciate that. For David, the pictures on the left were complete destruction of his home and the taking away of everything he owned. Imagine you'd been away on holiday for a couple of weeks and you'd returned home to find your house completely burned down. You'd forgotten to renew the insurance on the house, so that home, those possessions, completely lost. Not only that, unfortunately, internet thieves had accessed your bank account and stolen everything, and the bank was not taking responsibility and refusing to give you your money back. Everything gone. That was David's sick-like moment. I guess that was sort of the equivalent. But for us, stuff happens. We're frail physical beings. We can get hurt. The top image is from this week. This is Mexico. Those people know what a zigzag day is, don't they? Interestingly, this gets very close to home because my eldest son's partner is Mexican, Danny, and she was obviously worried about her mother. It turned out that the house across from her mother was destroyed. And as of today, we don't know what's happened to the lady that lived there. We hope she's alive, but we don't know. And of course, as more time passes, the likelihood that she's alive, that hope dwindles. But Danny has had her zigzag experience this year. She lost her father in the spring in a car crash. And I've seen her suffer, but I've also seen her recover, but it's taken time. But we get ill. We get diseases. We experience broken relationships. And people, we die. All of us will die. And as we get older, we experience people dying, loved ones. And it hurts. It hurts badly. Next slide, please, Richard. So the question then is, how do we react to the circumstances of life? I really like the picture on the top left because look at his face in the fires of Ziklag. Look at the absolute grief on that face. And it's good to grieve and it's right to grieve because we're emotional beings. We must grieve when bad stuff happens. It is not healthy not to grieve. But we also read in the passage that David's men responded by saying, who's to blame for this? Whose fault is it? And the obvious scapegoat was David. And the interesting thing about David is that he had attracted these people. They were the dropouts, they were the people who had no hope. They were attracted to David because he gave them hope. And here they were, the worst day of all their lives. They became angry, they became bitter. It says it in this passage. Each one was bitter in spirit because of their sons and daughters. And they turned on him. David could have gone down that same path. God, what have you done? It's not fair. Life isn't fair. This isn't right. And become bitter. Fortunately, for him, his people, the future of the Jewish people, he rose above that. But he could have become bitter. And that face on the right, contemporary man, is crying because of grief. Is he bitter? I can't tell. Only he knows what's going on inside. And God knows. So we react in different ways. And some people become so angry with the world, with life, with God, that they gradually die inside. And that's the truth. So we have a choice, Richard. We can choose God. We've had some songs this morning, very uplifting songs about God, you are here for us. God, you love us. We trust in you through the good and the bad times. And for us as Christians, it's a challenge. Do we take that seriously? Do we take that to heart? But what does it mean? You know, these passages, they don't really go into how people are feeling sometimes, the characters in the Bible. They just give us one-liners, don't they? And it says that David was greatly distressed. It says, David found strength in the Lord our God. Or one-liner, David found strength. What does that mean? What it means is that David, in his darkest moment, he lifted his eyes to God. When we come here this morning, we have those songs of worship. It's orienting our thinking towards God. Despite how we feel, how bad our situation, it encourages us to not look down, feel sorry for ourselves, feel self-pity, woe is me. It encourages us to say, God, you are so good. Remember, David wrote so many psalms from a position of abject despair. In each of those situations, he praised. David was the great praiser, the great example for us. God, you are so much bigger than me, than this situation. God, you are so wonderful. I just praise you. I thank you for your majesty. I don't like this, but I just praise you. We need to turn to praise. So when it says he encouraged himself in the Lord, he praised, despite his circumstances. But then it says he went on beyond that, so he encouraged himself. And then it says David inquired of the Lord. I don't think it was a case of, okay, I feel better now. What do I do now? When we inquire of the Lord, in all circumstances of life, we've got to spend time doing this. We've got to really listen. It can take a long time to hear the word of God, but when it comes, we can be sure about it. This wasn't a 5-minute, dear God, what do I do now? This is probably a long night of prayer, perhaps. A couple of nights of prayer. God, what do we do? And this wasn't, you might think this is an easy answer. Well, hang on a minute, they've stolen everything, you've got to chase them. This is a big army that he was up against. He had 600 men, reduced to 400 by the time he attacked. This was not a given. He sought God's face, but he spent time with God. Inquiring of God means we're on our knees. God, what do I do in this situation? What do you want for me? And that means turning to God's word. And we've got to allow God to give us a new vision, a new hope, and new dreams. David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue this party? And it says that God gave him a word, a clear word that says pursue. You will recover. You will be successful. Life won't be the same necessarily, but I still have a plan for you. You still have possibility of hope. And I love the passage on the left, Acts. You have made known to me the powers of life, the future. You will fill me with joy in your presence. So in turning to God, you experience joy and get a new vision. Vision with passion. You know, when the energy and the life springs out of you, ask for a new passion, a new hope, a new energy, a new drive. And in doing, and David then went on to attack. You need to attack life with zest, with energy. And in attacking, we need to remember that it is a battle we're in life. And we're called to put on the whole armour of God, described in Ephesians. Our armour is defensive. God's word is defensive, but it's also a means of attack. We will recover. We will recover. In Psalm it talks about the valley of the shadow of death. I've said this before. We go through the shadow. So imagine a building or a tree casting a shadow. That doesn't hurt us. It feels like it, but it's the shadow if God is with us. But we need to recover, and we need to also celebrate and acknowledge God's work in our recovery. It's not a mistake that when David returned and there were 200 men that didn't partake in the battle, he said, we will share with all. No one should be left out. So he celebrated. He recovered all. He regained his possessions and he shared. So don't forget to thank God when you come through. Don't forget to thank God day by day. Don't forget to thank God through every mini zigzag. There's big zigzags and there's mini zigzags. All the things of life that draw us down, drag us down. Thank God for recovery. And then don't forget to share. But with such sacrifices, God is well pleased. Richard. I don't know if you believe anything I've just said. I'd really like to speak to you afterwards. But the Bible is clear that we were sore in zigzag moments. In Isaiah it talks about people who were feeling weary, could barely walk and run, that God will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. But we have choices. When we experience a zigzag situation, remember to turn to God, not get bitter. Turn to God in prayer and studying His Word, seeking a new vision and recovering. And remember to thank Him. And then final slide. I take no credit for any of this. This book's been with me for a good year or so. From the Leadership Summit I picked that up at Bolton. Anybody wants to go? It's in a few weeks' time. Speak to me afterwards.
October 13th.
October 13th. Please speak to me. It's an amazing book. A guy called Brian Zand, who experienced a lot of difficult times in his life. And he wrote this book, I think about 20 years ago, really for his congregation. And it got out around the Christian church around the world. And he's developed it and put it into print. But you know, we need books like this. Of course, we need this. But we need these. We need contemporary experiences, people who have taken God at His word and actually lived through stuff and contemporize it for us. We need to know how modern day Christians survive the bad stuff in life. And they do, and they prosper, and they do well. So, not an easy subject, and I hope what I said doesn't sound good, but I think we have a blueprint. I think Ziklag is David's blueprint for us. When you encounter situations like Ziklag, the best thing you can do, acknowledge God for who He is, seek His will, seek a new vision, and recover all. Amen.